And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 19. Starting off this week with Ancestral Knowledge. 1 and a blue enchantment. It has cumulative upkeep of 1 colorless. When Ancestral Knowledge enters the battlefield, look at the top 10 cards of your library, then exile any number of them, and put the rest back on top of your library in any order. When Ancestral Knowledge leaves the battlefield, shuffle your library. So the idea here is you cast it, you can stack the top of your library 10 cards deep, exile any you don't want, and then you basically have to pay the cumulative upkeep, and if you stop paying it, your library gets shuffled, so maybe anything that you stacked gets shuffled in, so you have to keep paying the upkeep in order to keep getting those things that you want. But I just think this is great if you only want a couple of cards, right? If you look 10 deep, like 10 is a lot, right? So you pay 2 mana, you look 10 deep. You don't have to exile anything if you don't want to. You can just take one of those cards or 2 of those cards and put them on top, so that you get to draw them right away. I think this is particularly good in a Muldrotha deck. You know, you can just let this die and have it come back. People do that with Mystic Remora a lot, right? They just don't pay the cumulative upkeep. Or maybe once it gets too high, they'll just let it die, bring it back. You can do the same thing with Glacial Chasm. Just let it go to the graveyard instead of paying the cumulative upkeep and then play it again on your main phase. Ancestral Knowledge can work the same way in a Muldrotha deck where I can just look at the top 10 cards of my library and maybe there's 1 or 2 in there that I really want, put those on top. Or especially if you're doing the self-mill thing, right? With Muldrotha, a lot of people will do self-mill. In a few decks where you're, maybe Sidisi, where you want to be doing self-mill, this works as well. I just talked about Wood Sage in one of my last videos, which again would work in tandem with this, where you're putting the cards on top that you want in your graveyard or that you want to draw or whatever. You know, you just arrange it the way you want. Very unique card with a unique effect. Again, I think it works great in a Muldrotha deck, but it also could probably give consideration for a lot of other decks as well. Coming in at number 2, and of course another enchantment, Ancient Runes, 2 and a red. And this one is pretty simple. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Ancient Rune deals damage to that player equal to the number of artifacts they control. That's it. You know, it's going to be good in a Punisher style of deck. You know, a lot of people play stuff like that in a Mogus deck. It's rare you're going to come across decks that don't have a lot of artifacts. In my newest 10 deck ideas video, I had said you could just make an artifact and enchantment hate deck and win a lot of games with it because people rely heavily on their artifacts and enchantments. So just having this in play, your opponents take 3-4 damage from it on the beginning of their upkeep. It hits you too, so obviously you don't want to be playing this in an artifact heavy deck. For specific play groups, if you got a guy or maybe a couple of guys that really like their mana rocks, this could be really good against. Coming in at number 3, Angel's Trumpet. Very unique card. I'm sure a lot of people, I think, have probably seen this card already. I've seen it in a Commander game, geez, probably at least 3 or 4 times. So it's a 3 mana artifact. All creatures have vigilance. So you're giving all creatures, yours and your opponent's, vigilance. At the beginning of each player's end step, tap all untapped creatures that player controls that didn't attack this turn. Angel's Trumpet deals damage to that player equal to the number of creatures tapped this way. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. First of all, it's forcing your opponents to attack, right? So if you're in a deck that wants to be doing that, this is good. However, it's not a must. They don't have to attack, right? They can choose not to attack if they don't want to, but if they don't, then their creatures will tap down at the end step and they'll take damage from it. So if your opponents have any creatures in their deck that have an ability that they tap with, maybe not on their turn, right? So they want to leave that creature up to use its ability on another turn, it will tap down if they don't attack with it, which they probably don't want to do. There's just a lot of ways that you can use this card because it's doing so many interesting things. I had already mentioned Total War in one of my videos earlier, and this is a really interesting one if you match it up with Angel's Trumpet, right? Because Total War, whenever a player attacks with one or more creatures, you destroy all untapped non-wall creatures that player controls that didn't attack. So basically what happens here is they either have to attack with all of their creatures or they attack with none of them, right? If they only attack with a couple of creatures, then the creatures they don't attack with will get destroyed by Total War. So basically they have to attack with everything. And if they don't attack with anything, then Angel's Trumpet will say, okay, well now you have to tap down all those creatures and they're going to deal you damage. So it's kind of an interesting interaction with those two cards. Next up today, Annex. 2 blue, enchantment aura. Enchant land. You control enchanted land. That's it. So this is just a great card for, probably in a mono blue deck. I think just I gain control of your land. Whatever the busted land is that your opponent has, maybe they just have a Maze of Ith and you're trying to get in for damage. Stealing it seems pretty good. Blue's not great at destroying lands, so if you're in a mono blue deck, this is great. Maybe even in a, Dimir deck, any color or color combination that doesn't deal with lands very well. Like I said in my 30 colorless utility lands, I had Wasteland and Strip Mine at number 1 because being able to deal with your opponent's lands is so important. You're always going to have the guy with the Guy's Cradle or the guy who has the coffers and the Urborg out, right? And what's great about coffers and Urborg is you can annex their coffers, okay? Urborg is going to make all lands into swamps, so you don't need both of them. You just need the coffers. You steal the coffers, and now you can tap it and add a ton of mana, right? So it's an answer. I always like to mention the answers, especially ones that deal with specific scenarios. So there you have it. Coming in at number 5, Arcanum Wings. And it doesn't get much more unique than this. Of course, this is from Future Sight. One of my favorite sets, my favorite block is the Time Spiral block with Time Spiral, Planar Chaos, and Future Sight. So many unique, interesting cards. Basically, the idea is they were going to put out all these interesting mechanics and then possibly revisit them. Some of them they did revisit. This is one of the ones that they didn't revisit, and I don't know, maybe they should. So it is an enchantment aura. So what does this make? 4 enchantments in a row already here? Enchanted creature has flying. Okay, that's all right. But it has this very unique ability, and of course, when I say unique, I mean it's the only card in the game that does this. It has aura swap. 2 and a blue. So you pay 2 and a blue, exchange this aura with an aura card in your hand. I'm sure there's a lot of decks that can maybe use that. Very powerful effect, right? So you just throw this on a creature, give it flying. Who really cares, right? But really what you want to do is you want to pay 3 and swap Arcanum Wings out for that Eldrazi conscription or that whatever, that really expensive aura that you want to cheat into play. That's basically what this is. It just cheats auras into play. And because it is the only card in the game that has that ability, I thought I definitely needed to mention. Coming in at number 6, Arena of Ancients. 3-mana artifact, and this is not a nice one. This is definitely sort of a stacks piece. Legendary creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps. That's it. Just legendary creatures don't untap. And when it enters the battlefield, you tap all legendary creatures. Man, that can be really, really good in certain scenarios. I mean, obviously it affects you too, right? But just like with a lot of stacks pieces, you use it to your advantage, right? You put it in a deck where you don't care if your commander's tapped. Maybe you don't care to even play your commander. There's some decks out there, the Obeka decks. I just made a Triad of Fates deck with my Underwhelming Commanders series that is going to be pretty useless if it just stays tapped, right? There's a lot of decks that this card completely hoses. Coming in at number 7, Artificer's Intuition. 1 and a blue enchantment. Pay 1 blue, discard an artifact card. Search your library for an artifact card with mana value 1 or less, reveal it, and put it into your hand. That's pretty good. Like, this is a repeatable tutor, and repeatable tutors are always fantastic in Commander. I mentioned Wild Research in one of my earlier videos. Again, an enchantment that just sits there and you can keep tutoring with it over and over and over. It really can be fantastic in artifact decks, especially like an Emery deck. Like in an Emery deck, I think this would be an auto include, right? Because you want artifacts in your graveyard. Shroom deck, same thing. I've never seen this in a Commander game, so I don't know if people are playing this in their Shroom decks or not. You only can get a artifact with converted mana cost 1 or less. Okay, there's always, in an artifact deck, you're going to have what, like 10 of those probably. You go get your Soul Ring if you want. If there's nothing else you really want, you just go grab that Soul Ring or that Mana Crypt or that whatever Mana Rock you want. Pitch the thing in the graveyard that maybe you want to cheat into play with your Shroom. Just a repeatable tutor for artifacts. Pretty fantastic. Coming in at number 8, Ashes to Ashes. And when I mentioned Wicked Pact, everyone's like, isn't Ashes to Ashes just straight up better than that? Yeah, it is, right? It's basically the same card, except it's going to exile. So it's 1 black sorcery, exile 2 target non-artifact creatures. Ashes to Ashes deals 5 damage to you. So again, this is a great card to put in a Willow Dusk deck. The fact that it's a sorcery isn't bad because Willow Dusk, you want to use that ability on your turn anyway. So you exile 2 creatures, you take 5 damage, and then you put 5 counters on one of your creatures. So I think it's a good fit there. It exiles. That's fantastic in black. maybe the first card ever for black that exiles, I think. And the fact that it's non-artifact, I mean, who cares, right? I mean, I guess if your opponent has that dreaded Blightsteel Colossus, not very good in that situation. But other than that, usually the fact that you can't hit non-artifact creatures isn't going to hold you back very much. Coming in at number 9, Ashen Powder. 2 black sorcery. Put target creature card from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That's it. You know, it's just a resurrection for your opponents, right? You're just going to take any creature out of any of your opponent's graveyards, put it into play under your control. I know there's a bunch of people out there that love cards like this. They love taking their opponent's stuff. There's tons of decks, especially in blue and black, mill decks, where you're taking stuff out of your opponent's graveyard lots, right? You just mill your opponents, and then you have so much different things to choose from. You can just take their best creature, put it into play. It's essentially like a bribery for a mill deck, right? Because you're just basically taking their best creature and putting it into play under your control. So I think it probably goes on a lot of decks. And lastly today, Ashlings Prerogative, and another enchantment. Shocking. This one is very unusual. Again, it's just so unique that I just have to give it a mention. I'm not exactly sure how you would use it, okay? It's 1 and a red. As Ashling's Prerogative enters the battlefield, choose odd or even. Each creature with the mana value of the chosen quality has haste. Each creature without the mana value of the chosen quality enters the battlefield tapped. So basically what happens is, let's say you choose even. All creatures, not just yours, all creatures that enter the battlefield with an even converted mana cost have haste, and the ones that have an odd converted mana cost will come into play tapped, right? So, I mean, really, you could build your whole deck around this. There are other cards that care about odd and even. So maybe you could even build a deck that is an I care about odd and even cards. It's an interesting deck idea, right? But even you could just do this, say, for your commander, right? Maybe your commander, you really want it to be attacking. Say you're playing an Atali deck, right? This is just another way to give your commander haste. Your commander costs 6, so you're going to choose even. This gives your commander haste. Maybe it's going to hinder your opponents as well, so they don't have blockers because their creatures are coming into play tapped, right? So very interesting card, super unique. So I think it definitely deserves a mention. And that is it for today. That is 10 more cards you should be putting in your commander decks. And if you guys are buying any of these cards, you know, I hear people in the comments always, ouch my wallet and stuff like that. I have a TCGplayer link in the description. Just click on that, help support the channel. You know, I don't really tout that kind of stuff much. You guys can do as you like. If you want to help support the channel and you are thinking of buying these cards and you're using TCGplayer, just click that link. It helps support the channel. And before I go, I just want to give a shout out to my patrons. You know, I don't talk about my Patreon much. I don't really push it on people. People I think that probably really are into what I'm doing or really like the help that I can offer have joined my Patreon. They do help support what I'm doing, and I do appreciate that a lot. And if you really like what I'm doing, or maybe you need, you know, a lot more of my attention. Essentially what my patrons get more than anything is more of my personal attention when it comes to cards you should be playing, what direction you should go with certain commanders and everything like that. So check out my Patreon. I really am doing a lot more content on there now. My patron deck techs I'm doing on my Patreon. I'm going to be doing some spoiler videos on there. I'm probably going to be doing real-time deck building videos on there. I'm probably going to do eventually gameplay videos. People have been asking me for quite a bit. I'm going to start doing it on my Patreon first. I'm going to try it out on Patreon, see how it goes, and sort of once I get all the wrinkles ironed out, then I might move it onto my channel. But just a lot more stuff on my Patreon if you're really into what I'm doing. So check it out. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.